Okay, so after Goliad, the Anglos in East Texas, and remember the vast majority of Anglo Americans and their slaves that were in Texas up by this point, about 36,000 folks. Um, they lived in the eastern part of the state, and there's a very simple explanation for that. Rain being one, there was plenty of rain to grow cotton. And the other explanation is they wanted the mode of transportation at this point was water, were the rivers of Texas, which by the way aren't great transportation arteries. Anybody that knows Texas at all knows Texas rivers are not very deep. But anyway, it was better than nothing. So the vast majority of Anglos lived in East Texas, and after Goliad and coming hard on the heels of the Alamo, Anglos in the East Texas area, they just freak out and they panic, as I think is completely understandable. Um, Probably many of them knew about what had happened when Arredondo had come up with the Spanish army in 1813. A number of civilians were thrown in jail, many were executed. Santa Anna's army of about 5,000 men looked invincible. They had just won these major victories. And one of the things to remember is in the Texas Revolution, in the fall of 1835, things go great for the Texans. They capture Goliad, they capture Gonzales, and the big prize, they capture San Antonio. But in early 1836, things go the other way. They lose San Antonio and they lose Goliad, two of the most significant cities in Mexican Texas. So things take a dramatic turn for the worse. Santa Anna's army looks invincible. It's clear that Santa Anna is ruthless. There's no doubt about that, especially after Goliad. And so what you have is an incident that is basically a mass retreat, a panicked retreat of Anglo-Texans towards Louisiana. Why are they going towards Louisiana? Well, think about it. It makes sense. Louisiana is the United States. And once they cross the Sabine River, the border between Texas and Louisiana, they know that they'll be safe because the U.S. Army is there. And Santa Anna has no desire to get into a scrape with the U.S. Army. So you have what's called the runaway scrape, and it's kind of interesting in terms of a historical memory. The runaway scrape is kind of a funny name. It kind of makes it look lighthearted, the runaway scrape, kind of an ironic name. But what it was a panicked retreat of Anglo settlers in the spring of 1836 from their farms and plantations towards Louisiana. And it was a mess. It was a very rainy spring. People piled their goods on their wagons. The rivers at this point were quite swollen. And it was not fun at all at the time. It was just mass panic. And so what you have is Anglos in Texas thinking that they've lost the Texas Revolution, heading towards Louisiana, looking for the protection of the U.S. government. And one of the things to realize is the way these rivers were crossed at this point were by ferry. The spring rains had made the rivers very deep, and at one of the ferries at San Jacinto, there were 5,000 Anglo-Texans, and I'm sure many of their slaves as well, waiting to get across this ferry, and these ferries are very, very small. And so it was just a mess. It was just a mess. So what happens is, as the Anglo-Texans get towards Louisiana near Nacogdoches, many of them stop and they wait. They wait to see what's going to happen, and they know that they'll have time to get to the United States if Santa Anna defeats Sam Houston's army. So they stop and they just wait and see what's going to happen. And very interestingly, the U.S. military commander in Louisiana was a guy by the name of Edmund Gaines, and I'll put Gaines's name in the outline. I know you're one of the things you all hate about history is so many names, but it's actually a very interesting story. Forget about his name for a second. And just think about the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army is keeping a close watch on Texas. And remember, the U.S. Army is just next door. It's just next door in Louisiana. It's very close to the Texas Revolution physically. And most Americans, the vast majority of Americans, supported the Texas Revolution. Because of course the folks that were fighting the Texas Revolution, most of them had been born in the United States, and many of them were still U.S. citizens. And so the Gaines is there, and to this day, there are rumors. Even a guy named Anson Jones, who became later became governor of Texas, he argues that Gaines was just waiting for Sam Houston to give him the word, and that Gaines would have invaded Texas from Louisiana, that the United States would have intervened in the Texas Revolution on the side of the Texans. We'll never know for sure if this was the case. Don't forget that Sam Houston, who is the head of the Texas Army, his mentor was Andrew Jackson. He was very close to Andrew Jackson. They had like a father-son relationship. And Andrew Jackson just happened to be president of the United States. So a lot of smoke, a lot of smoke. We'll never know for sure if the U.S. was going to intervene or not. But ultimately, it became a moot point because of the Battle of San Jacinto. And San Jacinto, if you know Houston, it's east of Houston. Maybe many of you went to the San Jacinto Monument as children, especially if you're from the Houston area. And what had happened is that Santa Anna had split up his army and had moved east all the way to this area that's just probably about, what would you say, 25 miles, maybe less, from what is now downtown Houston. And Houston's army is retreating towards Louisiana. Now, two important points about this. Point one, Santa Anna's entire army was not at San Jacinto. It was just a portion of his army. So even after the Mexican army lost at San Jacinto, they still outnumbered the Texas army. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, that Sam Houston, his army got sick of retreating. We'll never know if in the back of his mind Sam Houston was retreating towards Louisiana because he wanted to draw in the United States into the Texas Revolution. There's no proof of that. He never claimed that. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence, but there's no clear evidence about that. But importantly, his soldiers were pretty insubordinate. And they were really tired because Sam Houston was retreating towards Louisiana, and they wanted to fight. They were enraged by what had happened in San Antonio, but maybe even more so the massacre at Goliad, and that they wanted to stand and fight. So the Battle of the Alamo, or I'm sorry, the Battle of San Jacinto was not a well-planned strategic victory on the part of Sam Houston. He was kind of reluctant. He did not really want to fight Santa Anna's army, but his soldiers forced his hand.